Welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here today for our webinar on deepening project-based learning. And could I have the next slide, please? I'm Elliot Levine, Research Director at the Aurora Institute, and we welcome you to introduce yourselves in the chat box, and please feel free to use it throughout the session today to ask questions and offer comments. If you'd like to share about the webinar on social media, our Twitter handle is shown here. And we want you to know that we are recording the session and we'll be sending you an email later in the week with links to the slides and the recording. Next slide, please. We're very fortunate today to have a panel of experts who are doing cutting-edge work in project-based learning, and they work with organizations that are advancing project-based learning nationally. We'd like to welcome and offer deep appreciation to Kristen DeVivo of Lucas Education Research, Devin Krugman of the San Francisco Unified School District, Deborah Peak Brown of Michigan State University, Natasha Thompson of PBL Works, Nathan Warner of EL Education, and Justin Wells of Envision Learning Partners. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And we also thank Lucas Education Research and Chris Scherer of Third Sector Strategy for leading the development of today's event. Next slide, please. To start with a little context, Lucas Education Research approached the Aurora Institute about doing this webinar in part because of our work in student-centered competency-based learning and the fact that project-based learning is an essential part of doing that well. You can see here a shortened version of our definition of competency-based education, and I think you'll hear throughout today's presentations and breakout groups that most of these elements are essential to doing high-quality project-based learning. What's so exciting about the 4 studies we'll be hearing about today is that they were conducted in hundreds of schools across a very diverse range of students, age levels, geographies, academic disciplines, and they used the most rigorous research designs, which are seldom used in K-12 education settings because they're very hard to implement. And the 4 studies found statistically significant positive impacts on academic measures and student engagement in comparison to students who are learning through more traditional approaches. So these findings are very affirming for anyone who's working to advance competency-based education, because high-quality project-based learning is such an outstanding vehicle for all 7 elements of the definition you see here, from deliberate equity strategies to student agency to meaningful assessment and more. Next slide, please. We'll be starting today with Kristen DeVivo giving an overview of the 4 studies. Then our presenters will discuss a series of practical issues about how to get started with project-based learning and how to scale it up in schools and districts. And after that, we'll be going into breakout rooms for about 20 minutes, and you'll be able to choose whether you want to learn more about the PBL studies themselves or whether you'd like to discuss PBL implementation at a more introductory or more advanced level. And then finally, for just a few minutes at the end, we'll talk about what we heard in the breakout rooms and some next steps. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Elliot. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Chris Scheer for orchestrating this event and to all the panelists who are joining me today. It takes a village to do this work, and we're really pleased to share what we've learned over the last 7 years. The slide that's up right now conveys the vision of Lucas Education Research. For those of you who have not heard of us, we're the newer kid on the block at the George Lucas Educational Foundation. Our sister division, Edutopia, has been synonymous with the George Lucas Educational Foundation for 30+ years. I joined to develop this division in late 2013, so just about 7.5 years ago. And our mission is highly aligned with competency-based education, as you heard from Elliot. We believe that authentic, challenging, active, and relevant learning experiences optimize opportunities for all students. to productively participate and lead in an increasingly diverse and dynamic society. In order to meet this vision, let's see. Oh, I guess I need somebody to move the slide for me. Our theory of action is that the learning sciences reveal active approaches to learning work better than traditional approaches, and for students from all types of backgrounds. While many of us who are practitioners, as I see many of you around the country have joined and may know this in your hearts, the evidence base is incomplete and poorly understood. So our goal was to more clearly define the key requirements of high quality project-based learning curricula and the necessary teacher supports. And then once we developed a minimum viable program for these courses, we looked to research them with rigorous research trials across the country. I'll be sharing those with you in a minute. Our goal is then to use these proof points to raise awareness around what high quality teaching and learning can look like. Next slide. So what is rigorous project-based learning? It is an inquiry-based approach with a challenging question rooted in core subject matter content. This is so important that we think about building the projects from the standards and really backwards mapping from those standards towards the development of a relevant project. It's centered on real world and meaningful problems. I often say that it's important for us to think about what happens outside of the four walls of school, inside of the four walls of school, and to make these projects really meaningful for our students. And importantly, these students learn through projects. I think there's a misconception that the project is the poster at the end, oftentimes, of learning. We like to say that project-based learning is the engine that drives the train and not the little red caboose at the end. So you'll see in a minute what that looks like for us, but the idea is that we're always engaging in project work throughout the course. Next slide, please. So in order to conduct our research around the study, we collaborated with many graduate schools of education, some of whom you'll hear from in a minute on the panel. And we looked to them for their expertise in the design and iterative redesign and study of high quality projects. And once they completed that design phase, we looked to develop what we call a minimal viable program with clear guardrails around what we're looking for implementation across our study. Understanding that adaptation is key to high quality PBL. So what you see here is an example of a course that we developed with the University of Washington. And this is the Advanced Placement Environmental Science course. You can see the driving question for the course is how can we rethink our use of the world's resources? And you can see that along the way, projects make up the scope and sequence of the full year course. You see here 4, in this case, there are 7 in this course. Most often we begin with a course introduction, and each of those projects have their own driving questions. So in the case of ecological footprint, you can see the question is, how can my family reduce our ecological footprint? And if I can take the next slide, you can see what happens when you go down to the next level, from the course level to the project level. You can see here we have a task roadmap. And again, we continue with driving questions, always metacognitive for the teacher and the student. What is the purpose of learning? How can we frame the question ahead of each learning journey? In this case, you see that the students begin to look at their family. How's my family living right now? What resources do we use and how much? How efficient is this life? Now, this also borrows from the work of integrated identities, where we know that when students can see themselves as scientists and can see the way in which they can influence their own home, that we're going to get a greater degree of agency and engagement in the learning experience. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And in addition to thinking about the curricularization of high quality project-based learning, we looked at the professional development to support project-based learning, both with PBL Works, who joins us today, as well as through a grant to UPenn with Dean Pam Grossman. And in the study that you see here, what we looked at was the core practices that we found consistent across various PBL networks around the country. This was important because we want to understand what are the foundational practices that help to prepare a classroom, a teacher, and those students for project-based learning. We found in this study 4 key domains, which include disciplinary rigor, authenticity, iteration, and collaboration. And for each of these, we then describe the micro moves and expectations in order to attend to these domains and to specify those differences by subject matter. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. What I'd like to share with you are the 4 studies that were debuted in February and have appeared in a number of education-related journals and even the Washington Post. We're so pleased to see the pickup that we've gotten in the news. These studies include Knowledge in Action, which is the project-based approach to advanced placement courses. Multiple literacies and project-based learning, which is an interdisciplinary approach to 3rd grade science, literacy, and mathematics. Project Place, another interdisciplinary approach, this time to 2nd grade social studies and literacy. And then Learning Through Performance, which was a next generation science standards aligned 6th grade course that attends to language and literacy scaffolds in science. Next slide, please. Across the 4 studies, our core findings are that students in project-based learning classrooms from high poverty, large urban to rural school districts across the United States significantly outperform students in typical classrooms. In the next slide, you'll see also that youth across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds benefit from challenging and authentic project-based learning. So now what I'd like to do is break down those core findings to each of the 4 studies in the time that we have. In the first study, this is the Knowledge in Action program looking at the effectiveness of PBL and AP courses. We developed a randomized control trial study in 5 large urban districts around the country. We asked teachers who were interested in participating to agree to be randomly assigned to teach the course the first year or the second year. And then we compared those in the first year to those who didn't get it in the first year. And what we found was a very significant and robust effect across all aspects of the AP assessment. We're very pleased to see this because we know that AP assessment is just one measure of transfer of the types of skills that we're looking to impact. Nonetheless, we found a significant and robust effect with 8% more of the PBL sample receiving a passing score on the AP test and qualifying credit for college than those who were receiving the traditional instruction. When we followed those students when we followed those teachers into the second year, now we had our second year teachers with a new cohort of students, we got an effect as great as 10% points more receiving a qualifying score on the AP test. It's important to note that this sample of students represented a significantly higher percentage of low income and BIPOC students than the traditional national test taking sample. We had 38% low income in this sample as compared with 30% in the national test taking sample. In addition, when we disaggregated that data to look at various subgroups, race, ethnicity, gender, we found that there was no particular subgroup that was driving these effects. These effects occurred across the board for all types of students. Okay, and we're going to move to the next slide. In this study, pleased to have Deborah Peak-Brown here. She's instrumental to this work. We looked at 3rd graders in project-based classrooms in Michigan. This study was a randomized control trial study with 2,000 students in the sample. And the representation of students from Detroit to Flint to Upper Michigan is actually very similar to the representation of third graders throughout the country. So we have a nice sample of third grade students from various environments and backgrounds. And again, we administered, the MLPBL team administered a science assessment borrowed from the State Department of Education, so written by a third-party group. And we found, again, an 8 percentage point difference with a significant and robust effect in favor of the third graders who received the project-based learning instruction and professional services. Importantly, we looked at these students' performance by race, gender, and reading ability, and we found no significant difference. Moving to the next slide, please. Okay, this also took place in Michigan, but with the University of Michigan. We looked at a social studies and literacy program in second grade. Because it was second grade, we had a researcher developed assessment of social studies knowledge that was administered blindly to the students, meaning the administrators did not know whether they were treatment or control classrooms. And we found 5 to 6 months more learning growth for the students in the second grade PBL classroom. In addition, we found that the students in these PBL programs were able to perform as well or better than their higher income peers, thus closing the gap in performance between the lower income PBL environments to the higher income neighborhoods. And the last slide for the study. Okay, and this project, working with Stanford University, looked at a 6th grade science program that, as I mentioned, incorporated language and literacy scaffolds. It also attended to issues of status and productive discourse and group work, thus resulting in a very generative and language-rich classroom. As one might expect with a high-quality language-rich program, where all students' voices matter, we found a very robust effect for our English learners. When we disaggregated this data, we saw as much as 28 percentage points higher on the California English Language Development Test for students in the PBL condition versus traditional science classrooms. In addition to this effect for English learners, we saw a general effect for transfer to the state assessment, Smarter Balanced Assessment, and ELA and mathematics. Smaller effect sizes, but significant. We thought this was an important finding to show that this transfer of knowledge from the science classroom into the ELA and mathematics assessment was an important finding. So I think that wraps it up for the 4 studies. The next slide will summarize what we learned across these studies is that PBL research showed significant and consistent findings across grades, subjects, and demographics. We strengthened student engagement, improved deeper learning, including disciplinary content. We boosted achievement across subject matter areas and reached students from all types of backgrounds. Next slide. Okay, so we have 4-page summaries of each of these studies on the lucasedresearch.org website, which hopefully you've had a chance to review. Our goal was to make them accessible, to give the key facts about the study to those who wanted to learn quickly what it was all about. And within each of these briefs, there's also a link to the actual technical report. We have beautiful high impact videos produced by our partner Edutopia describing what this looks like in practice. And in addition, the material that I shared with you with the curriculum is open. For the most part, they're open educational resources that we host on our website. And we have a number of white papers that you may find of interest as well. Okay, so with that, I think that wraps up the 10-minute or slightly more presentation on the research evidence in support of high quality project-based learning. What I'd like to do now is open it up to the panelists to ask a few questions. So I'm pleased to be joined here by Nathan Warner, who actually formerly worked with me at Lucas Education Research and was on the ground orchestrating and running many of these studies. He's currently at EL Education. Pleased to have you here, Nathan. My question for you would be, what are the lessons learned from the studies, and what can they tell us about implementing PBL practices in competency-based education settings?
Hi, Kristen. Thanks for that question. It's great to be here with all of you here today. I think a couple things. One, and in my answer, I'll try to draw some through lines between competency-based education definition that Aurora has and the project-based learning frameworks in these studies. My big takeaway is that there's just so much alignment between the definition of PBL, project-based learning, as defined in these studies and the way these curricula and the professional learning experiences were set up, and the definition of competency-based education here. And I'll just kind of highlight a couple of ways I see those connections. The first one is really centering in on this idea of meaningful, relevant, authentic learning. And so, Kristen, you mentioned that these were standards aligned project courses with projects embedded within them. And so they're standards aligned. And one of the ways in these curricula that meaning and relevance, which is so important, as we know, for student engagement, is kind of brought to life is through these driving questions, which Kristen mentioned. And so questions like, how can our government work for us? Or where does our water come from and how can we conserve it? Those sorts of questions really kind of set the purpose of learning. And what we see in some of the professional learning experiences that went alongside these studies were the supports for teachers in continuing to make connections for students from those driving questions in the standards, even more. So, Kristen, you mentioned adaptations, adapting those questions to be even more localized and connected to students' lives. And so that was part of the adult learning experiences here. So, and that was built into the professional learning program. So that meaningful, relevant, authentic learning, definitely core to both frameworks here. Another aspect of both frameworks that definitely is important to, I think, highlight here is the focus on student empowerment, agency, and voice. And so we know in high quality PBL classrooms, teachers are every day creating learning environments that elevate student voice. Kristen, as you mentioned in the Stanford study, support students with discourse and engaging with each other. That also supports relationship building, community building in the classroom, relationship building between teachers and students, which is so important. And then the agency piece, which is key to both frameworks as well. That idea that in high quality project-based classrooms, students have some decision making over how they learn, what they learn, and how they're going to show their learning, how they're going to present their learning, and that there's some agency there, and how important that is to student engagement as well. So those are two pieces I wanted to highlight and draw through lines between the two frameworks. And then the last thing, I'll just go back to the importance of high quality professional learning. I think in many schools of education, as we know, teachers aren't prepared to teach in a student-centered way or in a project-based way. And so if we're going to be asking teachers to engage in project-based learning and in competency-based education and leading classrooms, then we need to really attend to the adult learning, professional learning experiences, and really centering student agency or teacher agency, and building a community of learning where teachers can learn from each other so that they can adapt. If it's a curriculum, they can adapt the curriculum to their local context to meet the needs of their students. So those are a couple kind of connections between the frameworks that I see.
Excellent summary. Thank you, Nathan. And it's a perfect segue for my next question for Deborah Peak Brown, who has been absolutely instrumental to the research and implementation of the multiple literacies and project-based learning in Michigan. Deborah, what professional learning needs to be in place to support teachers in implementing PBL practices?
Well, thank you, Kristen. And I have been working with the multiple literacies and project-based learning, where we're working mostly with elementary teachers and supporting them in teaching project-based learning. It also is a part of my trajectory in my career as I worked with Detroit Public Schools implementing project-based learning there. So thank you for this particular question. One of the things that we've seen in working with teachers and helping support them in implementing project-based learning is that this is a big jump for many teachers because they're having to change so many things at the same time. The ways that they teach, as well as a classroom environment that is going to really support the kind of learning that we want to see in students. And this can't happen in a vacuum or overnight. Teachers need time in order for them to make those kind of changes, and they need the support that's going to help them to do that. And so, just as Nathan said, one of the most important things that we found is building this community of learners among teachers, giving teachers opportunities so that they can collaborate with their peers and really support each other as they are going through this change. Also, that the professional learning is sustained so that it's over a long period of time. It's not a one-shot kind of thing. Teachers need to try things and then come back to that community of learners and share and collaborate with each other about what worked and what didn't, and how did it happen in your class, and what things can you suggest that can help me. And one of the things that we constantly hear from teachers is the most important part of the PL sessions is talking to other teachers, is being able to share with other teachers who are teaching students that are similar to theirs and can really give them the support that they need in how to implement this. Another thing that we have found that is so important in professional learning for our teachers in order to move them forward and support them in implementing PBL is for them to actually engage in the features of PBL for themselves during the PL sessions. And so not as we're pretending that we're kids, but actually as adult learners, and being able to then reflect on the affordances that those particular features gave them as they were engaging in figuring out, as they were engaging in asking their own questions, as they were engaging in using the scientific practices, as they were engaging in developing these artifacts or developing models. And so teachers, I had one of the teachers tell me that we were working with driving questions and having kids really ask their own questions and supporting kids in asking their own questions. And this was something new for teachers that, oh, you mean I'm supposed to figure out how to ask good questions about a phenomena in order to figure something out? They're used to, as the teacher, asking the kids questions that they want the kids to answer, not supporting the kids in asking their own questions. And so teachers said, well, because I was able to actually do this as a part of the PL session, it really helped me to see how I could support my own students in doing this in the classroom. So really experiencing the learning as an adult and then being able to reflect on it was another part that was really important for teachers. And then to also have the PL sessions grounded in the curriculum that the teachers were going to be teaching, so that they were really getting a chance to work together and really look at all the supports that were in the curriculum, that they were able to experience doing the things that were in the curriculum for themselves. And then that helped them when they went back to the classroom to try to support students. And then also being able to see examples of other teachers doing it. So we also use video where they're seeing teachers, how do you support this kind of collaborative discussion in your classroom, so that they could actually see what other teachers were doing and then reflect back on it and really get a chance to dig into those particular strategies. And the last thing is that this is a shift for teachers. It's a shift for them to have students asking their own questions. It's a shift for them to stand back and allow students to give each other feedback. And so allowing them to experience these kinds of things through PL sessions that are really sustained over time, building this community of learners where they have this support system that not only within the PL sessions, but even outside of them, have people they can call and ask questions to. Those are the things that we found have really helped support teachers over the years, because it does take more than 1 year for them to really feel comfortable and really feel like they're well supported in enacting PL.
Excellent. PBL. Fantastic. That was a very thorough review and clearly from rich history and experience. Thank you, Deborah. I'm pleased to be joined here by Devin Krugman, who is working closely with the foundation and at San Francisco Unified School District. This is a very unique partnership whereby the district raised their hands after seeing the Stanford study in 6th grade and said, we want this and we want to modify it for our students' needs, and we want to build it out through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So Devin, with your experience working in now what's called the Equity in Science Education Program, a district-wide adopted initiative, what does strong implementation look like versus weaker implementation, and how do you get from A to B?
Yep. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much for having me. In San Francisco Unified, we are incredibly proud of our LER partnership and of the middle school science curriculum. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, I think to start with, are some of the assumptions that we make that leads to weak implementation. And I think a lot of those assumptions assume a one-dimensional or a narrow teacher experience, curriculum use experience, PD experience. So we sort of take generally in weak implementation settings a one-size-fits-all approach. We assume that by one method of professional learning or by one handing over, one core curriculum, that teachers will be successful. And I think often what happens is we build on that assumption when we look at our rock star teachers or our rock star schools that are doing really amazing work with that one-dimensional level of support we've given them. And then we make this assumption that it'll scale. And I think for folks who work across multiple schools or districts, that's an assumption we make all the time. We're going to pilot, and then we just assume it'll scale on its own without any sort of differentiated support. And so I think one of the things we've seen in San Francisco Unified School District is that if we really want to get to that strong implementation, where it's robust PBL teaching, where teachers feel like they're showing up to professional learning, and their whole self is supported as an educator and as a learner, that what it takes is sort of this interdependent web of initiatives and supports. And so, for example, we have our middle school science curriculum, which is PBL. It sits within a broader middle grades redesign where we've changed schedules so students are in block scheduling. There's different collaborative structures so teachers can meet as grade level teams. That middle grades redesign sits within a larger system of deeper learning as a district-wide priority where we have aligned early release PD across schools so that teachers from every single school can come together. We're all 7th grade science teachers. What are you doing? How are you learning? And all of that also sits within a series of differentiated supports so that teachers come in at an entry level and have experience with the curriculum, have experience collaborating, but they also can go into a teacher leader fellowship program that's specific to PBL when they're feeling like, okay, I'm ready to make some of my own stuff. So I think what we've seen in terms of what gets us from point A to point B has a lot to do with building this sort of interdependent web of PBL experiences and priorities. So it's like the air we breathe and the water we swim in. And then also thinking about how to differentiate both the curriculum resources and the professional learning supports that teachers receive so that regardless of where they are in that career trajectory, they feel really connected to the work. They feel really mission aligned with the work. And they feel like they're getting that just-in-time coaching and support. So we're super excited in the degree to which middle school science has kicked that off and how we've grown it over the last few years.
It's really been quite a feat and an important collaboration, the only one of its kind that we have in terms of a district-wide expansion. I'm going to roll right into introducing Natasha, who's here from Natasha Thompson. There you are. I had to find you. Thank you for joining us from PBL Works. So those who have seen this presentation in the early part know the AP project-based learning curriculum was studied in collaboration with PBL Works, who developed the professional learning program and is currently now providing a professional learning program in partnership with the College Board, a national initiative to prepare teachers across the country for further implementation of the Knowledge in Action program. Natasha, what are ways to scale PBL in a school or district?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Kristen. So what we've seen is that in order to scale PBL, it's very important to work at the teacher, school, and district level simultaneously. So district leaders should build coherence to remove any implementation barriers for school so that school leaders have the autonomy, the support, resources needed to create the conditions for teachers to build their capacity to design and facilitate projects. And so we know very, very much so, as Deborah said, an instructional shift does not occur in a vacuum, nor does it happen very rapidly. And the most successful implementations start with a solid foundation by examining the system as it currently is and getting that system ready to change. And this includes and is especially true at the district level, from curriculum and assessment to teacher evaluation system, and especially all of these other programs or initiatives that are ongoing in the system. It's important for district leaders to create this broader ecosystem needed for PBL to successfully take root and to flourish within their systems. And with this coherent district vision for PBL, principals are then able to create the conditions at their schools for this work to build and improve across time. So school leaders are able to create their own school vision for PBL and then start to work to develop a culture of collaboration, and not just collaboration among their teachers, but collaboration among other leaders so that they're getting feedback and giving feedback regarding their work in order to reflect on their practice around leading PBL at the school level, and creating this culture of sharing and risk-taking. It requires modeling at all levels, even at the principal level. And we also see that in order to scale PBL throughout a school, principals have to develop this instructional eye for PBL, as well as build the capacity of their teachers. And since implementation can't occur everywhere at one time, we wish it could, but it doesn't. And so developing an adoption strategy, which might include some early adopters, is also important for scaling. And so initially in scaling PBL district-wide, district leaders could consider just which school sites are open, a little more open to innovation to start, which sites have a culture of practice, open practice and collaboration and communication. District leaders can look for school leaders who understand high quality instruction and also know what poor quality instruction looks like. And then look for some leaders who have a shared leadership structure in place and who are able to have these courageous conversations around shifting teaching and learning.
Courageous conversations. I like that. And they are.
They are.
Thank you, Natasha. In the essence of time, I think I'd like to now ask our friend Justin Wells from Envision Learning Partners, who similar to what Natasha has described, has consulted across the country on transforming systems. And Justin, I'd love to ask you, what are the practical next steps and ways to get started?
Thank you, Kristen. And it's getting started, by the way, is a really exciting place to be. Don't be daunted. That's actually really there's so much excitement ahead in terms of starting to go down this road. And I'm really excited to see this intersection of competency-based education and PBL, because this is the right, it's actually both are needed for us to do this well. So real simply, and Natasha and I can go into more detail here, I think, in one of the breakout rooms. I know there's a lot of teachers, practitioners on here. If you're a teacher, implement at least one high quality project in your class this coming year. That's how to get started. Now, there's a lot behind that. I understand, and you don't have to create from scratch. There's good, but have it be a multi-week experience. And within that, this is the beauty of this, within that, you can be playing with all kinds of these exciting aspects of the definition of competency-based education. You can have it be based on mastery and not seat time, and have the students daily making decisions about their learning. So it becomes this manageable container within which you can, in your classroom, can be moving toward this beautiful notion of competency-based. Pull up a gold standard, PBL Works gold standard, or I love that UPenn core practice set of core practices that Kristen shared earlier. Have that as a shoulder partner and just look at those different things that it's calling out for, and just bump up the volume on different stuff, right? This is not an on-off switch. You can have an experience and be pushing it forward. If there's already a project happening in your course or class, do 2 over the course of the year. You get the idea. Like, you just have to keep expanding the practice. Sure, Deborah spoke earlier about these kind of long 9-month beautiful journeys. Don't be daunted. Start with 1 or 2 projects in your class. Now, if you're a school leader or district leader, how do you get started? Well, ideally, you have teachers that are not having to do this alone. And Devin and others spoke about, like, ideally, this is a collaborative practice among teachers. But I think systems leaders can commit to making sure that every student in your system has at least one high quality project-based learning experience through the course of the year. And then you build the culture and conditions for moving in that direction. I have more tips, around that, which we can talk about in breakout room. But I will just say, as a longtime PBL teacher, a lot of practical structures are helpful. What's in the course syllabus that I have to write every year? What am I telling parents on back to school night? And what's on the calendar in the spring are all places that, as a young teacher, I felt like, okay, the project's on the calendar. I committed to a project in my syllabus. I told parents about it. I'm on the hook. Let's do this. So anyway, don't underestimate the power of some traditional forms of communication like syllabi and back to school nights as a way to push a system forward.
Thank you so much, Justin, and all of the phenomenal panelists. We're going to transition into breakout rooms where you will have the opportunity to ask some of the questions that I see in the chat. And so I believe, Natalie, you were going to put up a slide. You now have the option to go down to your screen on the bottom, breakout rooms, and choose which breakout room you'd like to join.
All right, it looks like the flood of folks coming back in from the breakout rooms has slowed down. So we did want to do a quick wrap up about what we heard and what remains. We only have a few minutes, so we'll be quick here. And I know that there were a lot of questions that I saw a lot of hands up in the breakout rooms. I visited all 3 breakout rooms, and I know folks are leaving with more questions. I hope that means that we'll be able to continue the conversation over time. And what I heard is that there's a really strong desire in the field for resources about how to deepen implementation of project-based learning and to deepen the research to understand all of this better, and particularly in ways that honor and strengthen equity and student agency and meaningful assessment and all these parts of project-based learning and competency-based education. The most important thing I'd like to share is that the organizations that our presenters today work with have developed a huge amount of high quality resources for the purpose of deepening that work. And I really want to encourage you to visit their websites, EL Education, PBL Works, Lucas Education Research has put together some open education resources to advance project-based work, and also Envision Learning Partners. All of these organizations have lots of available research resources with high quality products, high quality projects, and books and professional learning. So go and check them out. And I think, why don't we stop there and go to the next slide, please. As we wrap up, please notice the survey link. Let's see if we have it in the chat yet. Trying to get my chat up here. Let me put that in there. There we go. If you can take a look at that survey link and just click on it, it's just 3 questions, and we would really appreciate your feedback. And next slide, please. And finally, just wanted to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. We invite you to stay connected with us. It was so great to hear this incredible work that has been done both in research and practice to advance project-based learning, and to think about how it can be applied specifically in schools that are trying to advance competency-based education in their own settings. Please join me in thanking our presenters, Kristen DeVivo, Devin Krugman, Deborah Peak-Brown, Natasha Thompson, Nathan Warner, and Justin Wells. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today, and for all the work that you're doing to advance project-based learning. So we look forward to seeing everyone soon. You will be getting an email in the next day or two with a link to these slides and also the recording of the webinar if you want to revisit parts of it. Thank you again, and take care, everyone.